believer needs to know the basics of Hebrew history, the history of the Jewish people. Why? Because if you don't, as you read through the Bible, you'll be confused. You won't understand what's going on in the context of so many different things in the Old Testament. So let me just give you a brief breakdown, okay? First, you have the period that's known as the period of the patriarchs. God calls Abraham. He's the first patriarch, right? The founder, the beginning, chosen man, the first Jew. All right, and then he has Isaac, and Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons. So this is the patriarchal period and all those developments. Then one of the sons of Jacob is sold as a slave down into Egypt. There's a famine. It ends up that the whole group goes down to Egypt. That starts their period in Egypt. So you have the patriarchal period, and then they go down into Egypt. They're down there for over 400 years, according to the prophecy. God told them that was going to happen. And they fall into bondage under the Pharaoh down there, and they cry out to God for deliverance. So you have this period of bondage in Egypt. Then God begins to move to end it. He raises up Moses, sends him down there. And so you have the period of the Exodus, all the plagues that come against the Egyptian people. And then finally, God delivers Israel out of Egypt, and they pass through the Red Sea. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and then they get ready to go into the Promised Land. So the patriarchal period, and then the period of the Exodus. They enter the Promised Land under Joshua, and they conquer their enemies and establish control over the region. Though they don't crush everyone, kill everyone, eradicate everyone, they establish a rudimentary control over the region. But that leads to the period of the Judges, where for a period of quite a long time, Israel would obey God, then fall away from God, and they'd be oppressed by some other peoples. They'd cry out to God, he'd raise up a judge who would deliver them, and so on, and then that would last a little while, and then back down they'd go again. So the period of the Judges. Then they cried out for a king. So the last judge was a prophet named Samuel, and he transitioned Israel from the period of the Judges into the period of monarchy, because he anointed Israel's first king, Saul. That king, of course, had to be swept aside because he just failed God and turned away, became a paranoid maniac and a egotistical, narcissistic person and so on. He had to be removed. God then raised up David, who took him to a high point. Then Solomon, his son, took him to their apex. But Solomon fell into idolatry. So after him, Israel had a civil war and split. So then you have a period of divided people of God. You have the northern tribes, which is called Israel or Ephraim or Samaria, and the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, which are in Jerusalem and have the temple and all that sort of thing. That period lasts several hundreds of years and finally ends when the Assyrian Empire takes over the northern tribes in 722 BC, and then the Babylonian Empire takes over the southern tribes in 586, 587 BC. Okay, so then begins the period of exile. So you have the patriarchs. You have the Exodus, you have the taking of the Promised Land and the period of the Judges and the monarchy, the divided kingdom, and then the exile. They're taken into exile in Babylon, at least those from the south, southern tribes are. And they're there for a period of time. And so we have books like Daniel and Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah, which tell us about that period. And then eventually the Persians take over. Cyrus the Persian decrees that the Jews can return to their homeland. So you have a period when they return and they come back, and they have very feeble beginnings but they eventually reestablish the second temple and they establish worship and so on. Then you have Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire. So Greek becomes the language of the people. The Hebrew scriptures are translated into Greek, the Septuagint version. Synagogues are developed, which become key in the spread of the gospel in the first centuries. And so you have this period at the end of the exile and the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then you have in that time the rise of Herod, the Idumean, who became king of the Jews, even though he wasn't a Jew. And then you have the takeover of Palestine by the Roman Republic, which then became the Roman Empire under its first Caesar Augustus. The decree to be taxed, that everybody had to return to their homeland to be registered and taxed and so forth, brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem. And so that was very important as they interacted with the Roman Empire. But then eventually in 70 AD, so many conflicts had erupted that the Romans crushed the Jewish nation and scattered them to the winds until May 14th, 1948. So their second temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, the Jews were banished from their homeland for 2,000 years. So there you have a brief history of the Jewish nation.